Shocking ancient Egypt sexual practices you won't believe were normal. The oil lamps flickered, the incense curled, and the gods watched without blinking. In ancient Egypt, the most private acts were often the most public. Not whispered behind closed doors, but staged under the gaze of priests, nobles, and scribes who recorded every movement. Here, sex could be worship, law, or punishment. A woman might kneel in a temple, her body transformed into a vessel for the gods. A pharaoh might prove his divine right through ritual unions that bound heaven to the throne. Entire cities might dissolve into chaos during the Feast of Drunkenness, where strangers embraced in alleyways and courtyards under the stars. These weren't scandals to be hidden. They were pillars of statecraft. Slaves were summoned without refusal, their bodies counted alongside livestock in a lord's ledger. Political enemies were humiliated through acts meant to strip not just power, but dignity. In the most secret rites, even the dead could be revived through ceremonies that braided creation and the afterlife together in ways modern minds struggle to imagine. This was a civilization where pleasure could sanctify, desire could destroy, and devotion could demand the unthinkable. Every act had its place in the cosmic order, and every body, from the queens to the captives, could be called into service. You're about to walk into the Egypt no textbook dares to fully describe, where the line between sacred and profane was not just thin, it was non-existent. From the festival grounds to the burial chambers, these are the truths that reveal a civilization far stranger, more intimate and more audacious than history's polite version will ever admit. 1. A night in the temple of the gods. Oil lamps spit and gutter, sending gold across walls where falcon-eyed deities stare without blinking. Incense thickens the air until every breath tastes like resin and heat. In the center aisle, a young woman kneels on woven reeds, skin glossed with scented oil, hair braided and pinned with amulets. She is steady on the outside, storming on the inside. Around her stand, robed priests and silent witnesses, scribes, officials, matrons of the cult, arrayed like a living wall. No curtains, no doors, no privacy. The body that was hers an hour ago has become an instrument of heaven and harvest, the vessel through which a city begs the Nile to rise and the fields to live. A bowl of natron touches her lips. Formulae are recited, precise as mathematics. A priest draws a sign across her shoulders, another presents linens, another names the god whose favor must be courted. She is not asked what she wants. In this order of things, want is irrelevant. The chant climbs, steadier, harder, until it beats like a drum in the chest. Outside, the river slides by, indifferent. Inside, expectation hardens into ritual. She lifts her eyes and sees not faces, but offices, power, record, judgment, each waiting to confirm that the rite was properly enacted. In another age, someone would call this a violation. Here, the word is service. Here, devotion is measured not in hymns, but in the willingness to be seen, weighed, and offered. The woman swallows, steadies her hands, and lets the ceremony claim her. Modern sensibilities would not last an hour in this hall. In ancient Egypt, the most intimate acts were braided into public life, performed, witnessed, remembered. Tonight is not about love, it is about survival, and survival has an audience. 2. Sex as a religious duty. In this world, creation is not an abstract doctrine, it is a job description. Temples are engines that keep the cosmos aligned. Stone calendars, economic hubs, theaters of renewal, and human bodies are among their tools. When the calendar turns to particular feast days, priests call for rites that reenact divine unions. Not lurid entertainments, but contractual performances aimed at securing fertility, rain, victory, continuity. Refusal is unthinkable. The community expects it, The gods require it. The land depends on it. Participants are chosen for purity of role, not romance. Trained priestesses, initiated acolytes, sometimes lay adults selected for symbolic reasons: status, lineage, omen. They undergo washings, anointings, rehearsals of gesture and word. What outsiders would frame as scandal, insiders call ma'at, order, the binding of heaven and earth through correctly performed acts. The intention is agricultural and cosmic. As above, so below. As enacted, so bestowed. There is no pretense of privacy. Witnesses confirm procedures. Scribes record offerings. Stewards tally grain. The rite is a civic technology, embodied prayer with measurable outputs, tribute collected, granaries filled, canals repaired, gods appeased, people fed. If floods fail or blight returns, suspicion falls on incorrect performance, an angle held too long, a line spoken too softly, a heart insufficiently aligned. Guilt is communal. Consequences are real. Ethical lines blur because categories blur. Devotion and duty, consent and compulsion, piety and pressure. The initiate may feel pride, dread, both. The priest may be sincere and still complicit. To a modern observer, the language of holiness cannot sanitize the asymmetry of power. To an ancient participant, holiness is precisely what grants the act its meaning. This is the calculus. A body pledged, a harvest hoped for, a god honored, a city spared from hunger. The rite ends, the ledger closes. Tomorrow the fields will answer either way. 3. The sacred consummation of power. Kingship in Egypt is theatre backed by grain, soldiers, and stone. Crowns and titulary proclaim a ruler's titles, but legitimacy must be performed, publicly, ritually, repeatedly. The living king stands as Horus on earth, the hinge between divine order and human survival. That claim demands proofs: strength in war, justice in judgment, and, crucially, creative potency. Festivals stage this potency in controlled spectacle. The ruler processes as music hammers bronze. Priests carry gods in gilded barks, and the court assembles to witness acts that mirror myth. Union, renewal, enthronement. Within that choreography, women of high status, queens, royal sisters, consecrated temple wives, embody cosmic partners. What later ages will call taboo the court frames as imitation of the gods, a logic older than scandal. If Isis and Osiris join to restore life, the king's house must echo that bond to restore the land. Everything is codified: washings, offerings, words that must not be mispronounced. Senior clergy supervise, not as voyeurs, but as guarantors that the state's most dangerous spell, public power made flesh, fires cleanly. The message to elites is unmistakable. The ruler is fertile. The offices are aligned. The sky approves. To common people glimpsing the outer rings of ceremony, prosperity feels imminent, almost tactile. Failure carries rumor like a spark through dry reeds. If drought follows, if enemies bite at borders, whispers gather. Was the rite flawed? Is the king favored? Political rivals need little more than a hint of divine disapproval to sharpen knives. Success, by contrast, seals alliances, quiets factions, and sanctifies taxes as offerings to a well-ordered world. Here the body is policy. The bedroom, carefully staged, selectively witnessed, ritually bounded, becomes an annex of the throne room. Power is not only spoken, it is enacted, joining myth to monarchy so the fields will green and the people will eat. The Feast of Drunkenness. Once a year, Egypt surrendered to chaos in the name of Hathor, goddess of love, pleasure, music, and intoxication. The Feast of Drunkenness was no polite temple gathering. It was a deliberate, state-sanctioned unraveling of restraint. From the palace courtyards to the mud-brick edges of the poorest village, wine flowed in quantities that could turn the Nile red. The myth was the excuse. Hathor once nearly destroyed humanity in her rage, but was pacified when the gods tricked her into drinking vats of beer mixed with red dye, mistaking it for blood. She became intoxicated, laughter replacing wrath, and life was spared. To reenact her transformation, Egyptians gathered under the desert stars, drinking until the earth tilted. Music thundered, sistrums rattling, drums pounding, as inhibitions dissolved. Rank meant nothing here. A noblewoman, her gold collar flashing in firelight, could end the night tangled in the arms of a fisherman. A slave might find herself laughing beside the man who owned her, distinctions blurred to nothing. Sexual encounters erupted in alleyways, on temple steps, in gardens perfumed with lotus and sweat. It was not hidden. It was part of the rite. Priests moved among the revelers, blessing the abandon as an offering to Hathor. By dawn, the city lay in a hungover hush, bodies scattered in courtyards, sand clinging to oiled skin. Officially, it was divine renewal, a symbolic purging of violence through pleasure. In practice, it was the one day where desire, no matter how reckless, had the gods' permission. 5. The pharaoh's bloodline. At any cost. In the royal courts, marriage was never about romance. It was about preservation. The throne was not to be diluted by common blood. The gods themselves, the myths proclaimed, had married brother to sister, father to daughter, to keep their essence pure. The living pharaoh, divine in flesh, was expected to do the same. Brother wed sister, not because of love, but to bind the double crown to a single, unbroken lineage. Some unions were ceremonial, others were consummated. In rare but whispered cases, a father might take his own daughter as queen. The royal household became both palace and prison, its corridors echoing with politics disguised as intimacy. Every birth was a political event. A child from a full sibling union carried the untainted claim to the throne, making it a weapon in succession battles. Yet behind the gilded facades, the risks were tangible. Whispered deaths in infancy, fragile heirs, and the quiet toll of inbreeding. These were never spoken of openly. Publicly, each child was presented as the living proof of divine favor. The practice was justified endlessly. Priests invoked Osiris and Isis, Shu and Tefnut, divine siblings who ruled the cosmos together. Court poets wrote of sacred unions, never mentioning the strain or the whispers of deformity. It was political theater, gilded with myth, enforced by tradition. To refuse such a match was unthinkable. To marry outside the royal bloodline risked the throne itself. In this gilded cage, love was a luxury none could afford. The body was simply another tool of statecraft. 6. Pleasure and punishment. In Egypt, the same act that could sanctify could also destroy. Sexuality was not only a gift to the gods, it was a weapon in the hands of rulers. Humiliation could be as calculated as a coronation. Captured enemies, especially high-ranking ones, might be paraded stripped through the streets, their nakedness a spectacle of defeat. Forced acts, whether between men or with women chosen to shame them, were staged to rob them of honor before execution. The goal was not merely to kill, but to erase their dignity, to make their names rot faster than their bodies. Political rivals within Egypt's own elite were not immune. An accusation of sexual transgression, true or fabricated, could shatter a reputation overnight. A courtier accused of seducing a temple wife or a prince's consort might be publicly beaten, shaven, and branded, his disgrace paraded as a warning. Even in the palace, punishment could be intimate. A fallen favorite might be assigned degrading sexual service to those beneath him in status, the act itself a living reminder of his loss of rank. For women, the stakes were even higher. Branded as adulteresses, they could be stripped, beaten, or forced into temple servitude, where their bodies became offerings not of devotion, but of shame. These punishments were not hidden in shadows. They were performed so all could see the consequences of defying the will of Pharaoh or the sanctity of the gods. In such a system, desire and fear were never far apart. The bed could crown you or destroy you, and the choice was never truly yours. 7. Slaves of the flesh. In the grand houses of Thebes and Memphis, wealth was measured not only in gold, cattle, and grain, but in people. Slaves, war captives, debtors, or those born into bondage, were as much property as a chest of lapis or a field of barley. And like any property, their use was at the whim of the owner. A slave girl grinding flour in the courtyard could be summoned to a bedchamber without warning. Refusal was not a possibility. Her body was part of the household's resources, available to entertain guests, please the master, or cement alliances through private gifts. In some households, foreign slaves were prized for their exotic looks, paraded like ornaments before being dismissed behind closed doors. Male slaves were not spared. A strong young captive might be kept as a guard by day and used for pleasure by night. A humiliation meant to remind him of his conquered status. In a society where power and dominance were everything, forcing a man into sexual submission was as much a political act as a personal indulgence. No law recognized this as violation. A slave had no legal personhood, no rights to body or dignity. They could be bred like livestock, traded like spice, punished for displeasing their owner in bed as easily as for spilling a cup of wine. These acts were not hidden shame. They were woven into the quiet routines of elite life. Slaves served wine, prepared beds, and sometimes occupied them under orders. Their value was counted in ledgers alongside grain harvests and livestock tallies. In the eyes of their masters, they were flesh with a market price. In the eyes of the state, they were invisible. 8. The fertility rites of the dead death in Egypt was never the end. It was a crossing, and the living were expected to help the dead make it safely to the other side. Most offerings were grain, beer, and incense. But in certain, more secretive traditions, the offering was sexual. Some priests believed that union, the act of creation itself, could recharge a soul's vitality, ensuring it entered the afterlife whole and strong. This belief spawned rituals where intercourse was performed in or near tombs, sometimes as part of a symbolic reenactment of Osiris and Isis, the god and goddess whose union restored life after death. In the wealthiest funerals, temple women or ritual specialists were brought into burial chambers for this purpose. The act might occur beside the sarcophagus, within the painted scenes of paradise and judgment, or in a separate chamber before sealing. The idea was that the energies exchanged in the living act would follow the deceased into eternity. The darkest whispers spoke of even more disturbing practices, acts performed on preserved bodies. While scholars debate the extent, some ancient sources and later accounts hint at necrophilic rites cloaked in religious justification. Whether rare or more common than we imagine, the mere existence of the belief shows how tightly sex, life, and death were braided together. In these rites, the human body was not just a vessel for the living, but a tool for the dead, a bridge between worlds. To modern sensibilities, it is a violation. To those who lived under Egypt's sun, it was service to family, duty to gods, and an act as sacred as any prayer whispered over a mummy's wrappings. 9. Forbidden love and hidden crimes. Even in a society where sexuality could be sacred, not every desire was sanctioned. Behind the temple walls and palace facades, Egypt's forbidden loves unfolded in secrecy, each one a risk that could end in ruin. Adultery was the most dangerous. A wife caught with another man could be divorced in disgrace, beaten, mutilated, or reduced to slavery. A commoner accused of touching a noblewoman could be executed without trial. For a man, sleeping with another man was not explicitly outlawed. but taking the receptive role could invite accusations of weakness and dishonor. Social death in a culture obsessed with dominance. And yet, the heart did not always obey the law. Same-sex relationships existed, some whispered about in gossip, others immortalized in subtle art that later scholars debated for centuries. Illicit trysts bloomed in gardens, in shadowed corners of banquets, in storerooms stacked with jars of oil and wine. Servants acted as messengers, arranging meetings under the noses of masters. Affairs between priests and temple women, or between temple women themselves, were among the most dangerous. Sacred vows made transgressions into blasphemy, punishable by public humiliation, forced labor, or worse.